What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and it's finally time to take another look at rFactor 2 on this channel. This is simply one PC sim racer dude's opinion. So let us begin. A little backstory to start this video off. This is going to go much differently than I initially planned. Having been mostly out of sim racing for the past few years, I figured I'd do a review, especially as a ton of things have been changed within rFactor 2. There's been tire model updates, there's been AI updates and overhauls, graphics and filters and things like that, a new UI, actually times 2, a multiplayer competition system, a new audio system, traction control and ABS built into the cars now, a competition system, the new audio system, if I didn't already mention that. There's been a total shift in content strategy. To say things had changed a good bit would be an understatement. It was quite clear that I needed to essentially approach it as if it was a new game, even though it had the same title on it. Back during the Steam Winter Sale, I went ahead and picked up a bunch of tracks, as well as the Dora IR18 Indy car, the LMP2 cars, and the GTE cars. This was conveniently content that's up to spec in rFactor 2, as well as the most exciting content on offer for me. But as I started to play the game, it was clear that despite the fact that they've changed a shed load of stuff, and clearly Studio 397 has spent a lot of time trying to make something, I was very unimpressed. There was a video about a decade ago on this channel where I believe it was titled rFactor 2, What Could Be But Isn't Quite Yet. And that's basically exactly where rFactor 2 is still, to this day, in my opinion. It still drives just as good as it ever has, and still, it's overall as good as anything out there on its best days at its best moments. But the problem is, it's still, even all this time later, almost never at its best. This video that I had done, and the script that I had done, that explained all this in much greater detail, and went on for way too long, as I have been known to do, admittedly, I wasn't quite happy with it. I recorded half of the audio, and just wasn't really happy with it, and then I caught the thing that shall not be named, which delayed me and caused me to take some time away to rethink it, because I wasn't in any condition to record a video anyways. Then that virtual Le Mans 24-hour race was a train wreck once again. And just to make it clear, I don't want this to be labeled as piling on in the wake of that event, because this was all in the works well before that went down. And really the frustration that I had in that other video that will never come out, as well as the taste of the frustration that you guys just heard, is down to the fact that rFactor 2 has always been best described as what could be but isn't yet. A game that's perpetually gonna be better so much in 5 years, but inevitably finds a way to just be the same exact game that it was 5 years prior. The looming reality I've been convinced of with rFactor 2 is it will never reach any sort of that potential on a stable basis, because it's endemic to what rFactor 2 is. A little simple sim racing history. The original rFactor 2 developers, ImageSpace Incorporated, rightly ascended to sim racing immortality. Decades ago, Sports Car GT was a happy little accident, so to say, where a late rush to get the game out the door led to files be open and exposed and easily editable by anyone who went in with Notepad. They'd go on to do EA's F1 games from the early 2000s, with F1 Challenge 99-02 in particular carrying the torch for moddable sim racing platforms. Back in those days, you had the Papyrus racing sims, and then you had the ISI racing sims. You were probably like one or the other, because they were doing two very different disciplines, with Papyrus being largely Grand Prix Legends, or alternatively the NASCAR racing stuff at the time, or alternatively the road racing stuff with ISI. After a few years, especially with F1 Challenge 99-02, basically every season of F1 of note that you wanted was added through mods. Australian supercars, the better part of basically all of Group C, including cars that didn't even actually end up racing, just like anything and everything, including my personal favorite, the Sports Car Challenge mod for the early 2000s Le Mans goodness. Like, ISI games were that important to sim racing. EA ended up losing the F1 license, and ISI was spun back out on their own, and the Mad Lads done and went one of the and made the best racing sims of all time, the original rFactor. Following the same ethos, modability was put first and foremost. The engine was updated and improved, and eventually licensed out in various iterations to other studios. Like, to say that they knew what they were doing and were really good at making racing sims would be an understatement. I mean, if you're doing the whole, like, Mount Rushmore thing, you're talking about Papyrus, Jeff Crammond, ISI. There's no doubt about it when it comes to sim racing, because those three created what we have now today, even. So while we all ended up modding the snot out of rFactor, ISI had started working on rFactor 2 development a few years down the road when rFactor was all finished up and time to move on. And for one reason or another, either knowingly or unknowingly, ISI plotted a very different course for rFactor 2. I don't know for sure, but my gut feeling is they probably decided that they've done the same thing 3 times now and had tremendous success, as I talked about. You know, there was also some issues that were apparent and should be fixed that I think they really wanted to go ahead and address because it would be to the betterment of their game, and there wasn't nearly as much competition on the market at the time. So here was their opportunity and time to truly make something special and push the genre to new heights by creating a genre-defining game. And this is where rFactor 2 went wrong, and why I feel like it's no longer going to come good, because these are issues from rFactor 2's development from that specific time, and that time is no longer here now today. Everything got turned up to a new level. The tire model was all new, the wider physics engine was updated, the graphics overhauled. Basically every feature you could want was crammed in here. This is all well and properly a step forward, and why there's so much appeal to rFactor 2, because it has everything. However, with that comes a giant step up in complexity. Then you get into some of the decisions that were made. For example, in rFactor 1, joining servers with mods was sometimes kind of difficult just due to version mismatches. So the rFactor 2 packages system was added. You know, this was a real attempt to solve a real issue, though unfortunately the way it was done was really not in line with the way people were going to actually use it, so it really just served to add extra steps, extra complexity, and extra things to have to learn and hoops to jump through, which did not end up working out the way that I think a lot of people would have hoped it would have. You then get into the HDR profiles, which have largely been forgotten about with rFactor 2, but it was supposed to help the game look better visually and enable you to do more tweaking and all that stuff. But in the reality, because of the system, most tracks ended up with radioactive grass, as we used to call it, thanks to not really even utilizing this system, which drove players away simply due to terrible looking graphics. Like, honestly, worse than rFactor 1 graphics, which, mind you, by this time had been tweaked and tuned and massaged to look fantastic, actually. There was also the multiplayer license, which if you wanted to run rFactor 2 in multiplayer, you would have to pay extra. ISI decided that they needed to make this a sustaining project, fair enough for them, and I don't think they were particularly egregious with their, we're trying to make money here type ways. I don't feel like it's unfair monetization back then. However, it definitely was a point of controversy, and when they decided to undo that, it was again another part of controversy just because of the fact that, well, now those people that paid extra are not getting anything extra for what they paid for. There's a couple of more smaller little things as well, but I feel like those 3 big ones right there are largely major issues that kind of just put rFactor 2 off on the wrong foot in terms of core decisions. And then you had initial buggy beta launch. While rFactor 1 and its stepchildren were well and truly hitting their stride, performing like a juiced up Barry Bonds. iRacing's initial years, starting to get going there, and then rFactor 2 launches flat. Yeah. I think a lot of us, myself included, were just kind of figuring that, no worries. Eventually rFactor 2 will be improved and bug fixes and tweaks, and we all knew that the mods and everything are going to take time anyways to get everything up and running and get it going. We all kind of expected that rFactor 1 would just kind of phase out in 2 or 3 years in favor of rFactor 2, but that time was very not kind to rFactor 2 because nothing happens in a vacuum. That time for polish and just initial bug fixing included Italian off-brand, I can't believe it's not rFactor, Assetto Corsa coming to fruition. A small game that was at the time hyped up only within the sim racing community and only really known about within the sim racing community, came in and out rFactored rFactor 2 and became one of the most popular racing sims ever. iRacing went from sim racing public enemy #1 to well and truly having the first mover advantage, cornering the market, and wide-scale competitive multiplayer sim racing. All these have come together to create the reason why, in my opinion, rFactor 2 largely feels as a directionless ship adrift in a stormy sea. A modding platform that has a comparative lack of top quality mods, a multiplayer platform that failed to capture players. I could say that there is an opening for a offline oriented, AI racing oriented racing sim out there, because no title has really captured a crown or really staked the claim as the definitive, this is the best overall package if this is what you're into. Because every one of these other competitors out there on the market trying to enter into that type of space all kind of have various different issues, be it rFactor 2, Automobilista 2, Automobilista 1 if you're willing to accept something that's a little bit more dated, racer room racing experience. They all kind of sort of have issues, and they all have their pros and their cons, and it's just kind of one of those things where they all got reasons to exist in that sense, but they all don't do enough to separate themselves from the pack. And really at this stage, in my opinion, to change the status quo that's existed in sim racing for years now at this stage would require some sort of truly massive change to any of these racing sims out there. It would not be the type of change that happens in an update. It would be the type of change that happens behind closed doors, offline. They're working on the game behind, typical development settings, and they're releasing a new game, a new platform, where you'd have like an rFactor 3, an iRacing 2, ACC 2, or a true Assetto Corsa 2, what have you, because the types of things that need to happen are going to be so big that you're not just going to unleash them as a patch to the world. So, I don't know. That's just my thoughts. That's just one PC sim racer dude's opinion on rFactor 2. Do with it what you may. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. Bye.